So hello, you're all very welcome to today's discussion with Professor Babatunde Fagbayibo and Professor Thamil, Venthan and Ananthavinayagan on the subject of decolonizing the curriculum from the TWAIL perspective. So my name is Donna Lyons and this is seminar 25 in our speaker series. This event is dedicated to the memory of our dear friend and colleague, Mr. James Kingston, who was esteemed legal advisor to the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs and who had kindly agreed to speak on the series this year. And at this time, we also remember the much loved Dr. Vicky Conway, Associate Professor at the School of Law and Government, DCU, whose passing we learned of today. So before beginning this interesting discussion on TWAIL and decolonizing the curriculum, I'd like to introduce our speakers. So Babatunde Fagbayibo is a professor in law at the University of South Africa. He graduated with a doctoral degree in public law with a specialisation in regional integration law from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. His research primarily focuses on the institutional development of the African Union, in particular the process of endowing the organisation with supranational competences. Other research interests include critical approaches to international law, transnational policy analysis, and governance and democratisation in Africa. He's written widely on issues of African integration, development, and democracy and good governance in Africa. He's also the editor-in-chief of the Southern African Public Law Journal and also serves on the boards of the African Journal on Democracy and Governance, the Nigerian Yearbook of International Law, and the Caribbean Law Review. So a very impressive profile. As has Thamil, Venthan, and Ananthavinayagan, who holds an LLM from Maastricht University, a PhD from NUI Galway, and has been a teaching associate at the University of Nottingham since February 2021. Before joining Nottingham, Thamil worked as a fellow and research assistant at the Irish Centre for Human Rights in Galway from 2013 to 2017, and worked as a lecturer in international law at Griffith College, Dublin from 2017 to 2020. His doctoral research focused on the engagement of Sri Lanka with the United Nations human rights machinery, published as a book in 2019. Thamil's research interests lie in post-colonial studies, racism and fascism in international law, critical race theory, and TWAIL, and he's published widely in these areas. So it's a great privilege to speak to you both. There's been huge interest in this talk today, and I'm delighted to speak to you primarily about Professor Fagbayibo's article, Some Thoughts on Centering Pan-African Epistemic in the Teaching of Public International Law in African Universities. So Babatunde, I read your article and I found it very incisive and very helpful. It makes many important observations and it does provide key lessons for those of us engaged in the teaching of international law. So I'm just wondering, would you like to broadly map it out for us to provide some context for the discussion, or talk us through the main elements of your analysis in the article?
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Thamil, as well, for the kind invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yes, fantastic. Okay, thanks. So just to get into to dive into it, the article again generally looks at how public international law is taught in African universities. I mean, again, the usual caveat: Africa is not a country, right? Yep. So it's a very diverse continent with different linguistic, political, economic, and even social inclinations. But the article just looked at about 13 universities across English-speaking African countries. I know, for example, Nchiko, who is, I'm sure is here, has also done something similar to that regarding Francophone, French-speaking African countries, public international law, the teaching of public international law. So looking at just the syllabus and, what came out from that research was that international law is essentially taught in the same way. So in terms of the structural presentation of the syllabus, in terms of textbooks used, in terms of, just the entire, the ideational spectrum of teaching international law is essentially the same, which is very Eurocentric in nature, which speaks to, this is how international law started in Western Europe, the fathers of international law located in Western Europe, institutions of international law, primarily located again in Western Europe, jurisprudence of international law, again located in, again, Euro-America and things like that. And these are the issues. And of course, it's also kind of introspective for me as well. Having been a student, I haven't gone through the university and learned all of this. And of course, being a teacher myself, teaching my students the same, kind of repeating the same thing and things like that. And the question was that, so where are the issues? Where are the other additional spectrums or pluri-civilizational approaches to international law that are excluded in this in the syllabus? So, for example, pre-colonial African ideas of internationality, so diplomatic engagements in pre-colonial Africa, trade networks, and there were extensive trade networks in pre-colonial Africa, state building activities, which even preceded what you call your Westphalian approaches, and also, the systematic approaches to internationality, and also TWAIL, TWAIL literature and TWAIL scholarship are completely excluded from these teachings and all of those things. So I looked at that and came up with what I call the critical integrative approach, saying how do we now center Pan-African epistemics or Pan-African ideas and ideations in the syllabus. So I looked at the importance of multi-inter and transdisciplinary engagement, bringing extratextual materials and voices into the teaching environment, teaching and learning environment, and also what I call the ethical consideration as well, kind of centering also feminist ideas and approaches in critical approaches to international law, and also not thinking that pre-colonial Africa is a garden of, or was a garden of Eden, what Ali Mazrui had called romantic Gloriana, saying we should also look at the complexities of it, and also not to engage in thinking that African civilization is actually the only thing we should teach. We should look at many other things. We should think of it in terms of basket of civilizations. And what do you learn? What can we take from all of those things to sharpen teaching, learning, and processes of international law? So essentially, that was what the article considered.
Thank you so much. It is a great article, and I would encourage anybody who has the opportunity to read it. And maybe even just to go backwards one step, would you mind telling us a little bit more about TWAIL, the movement, what it is, where it originated, how it features in research? And I suppose this is a question for both of the panelists.
Oh, okay. Thamil or...
Oh, well, I suppose, but if you'd like to start, Babatunde, and then...
Okay.
Yeah.
You take the harder part of the question, Babatunde.
Yeah. Disagree with everything afterwards, tell us.
Yes. So TWAIL, again, third world approaches to international law, essentially started in Harvard. A group of scholars and students and in Harvard came together in 1996 to start rethinking the ideas and approaches to international law, to essentially question the racialized or the racist underpinnings of international law, and again looking at alternatives to international law. Of course, looking at all of these issues, looking at it from questioning the neoliberal underpinnings of international law, Pan-African, or global South perspectives, exclusion of global South perspectives in what we know as international law and all of those things. And they came together, had a meeting, coined the term third world approaches to international law. Again, had another meeting in 1997, had another big conference in 2007. But I think it is very important that, you know, as Gatti had said, James Gatti had said in one of his articles, that, you know, this is an idea. So TWAIL is, you know, a work in progress idea. So it's not, it has not reached its terminus, so to speak. Different people with different ideological wavelengths are actually there looking at international law, you know, this kind of microscopic scholarly lens on various aspects of international law. And I think what TWAIL has been able to do effectively is to look at all this direct and indirect, you know, ideas that actually centers Eurocentrism in international law and kind of deconstruct, unpack it, and to see how we can think outside of the box, so to speak. We're beginning, so you know, they are no card-carrying members of TWAIL. There are people who have sensibilities, you know, TWAIL sensibilities. There are people who are not even lawyers. And that's one of the good things about TWAIL. It's very inter-transdisciplinary in its perspective, you know, because you look at even some of the writings of your big TWAILers, they've been able to look at disciplines such as history, sociology, anthropology, archaeology, political economy specifically, especially when international law is being critiqued from its, you know, critiqued from its neoliberal perspective. So you look at you know, political economy and ideologies and ideations and all of those things that actually inform what we call international law, and using also social science tools to explore some of these problems. And also beginning to question even location. So, you know, it's what to also mention James Gatti again, you know, location, the problems of limitations of location and ideas, saying, why do we always think, when we think of international law, we always think of it in terms of, you know, the Hague, New York, Geneva axis, or when we think of the jurisprudence of international law, when we think of institutions of international law, we do not pay serious attention to, you know, very enriching jurisprudence emanating from the global south, from courts such as the African Court of Human and People's Rights based in Arusha, and also from even people from the global south, judges from the global south, and their contribution to the jurisprudence of international law and all of those things. So those are some of the key issues that have been raised by TWAILers, and of course there are a generation of TWAILers as well, which has been you know, your first generation TWAILers, second generation TWAILers, and of course the new generation TWAILers. We must also look at how new media, for example, social media, is actually changing the landscape and also bringing TWAIL perspectives to the fore. So you go to Twitter, for example, LinkedIn, Facebook. There are new, you know, young emerging researchers experimenting with different tools and different ideas in bringing some of these issues to the fore. So those are some of the very exciting and innovative techniques being used by TWAILers, both self-identifying TWAILers and also those who also have the TWAILian sensibilities, as I call it. So I think Thamil would be able to, you know, shed more light on this.
Well, I mean, just to add the beautiful way how Babatunde has already put it. I mean, TWAIL in its essence is about creating counter-hegemonic resistance. And I think that is the very core of what we TWAILers are. And we have, occupied the different areas of international law and want to dominate the narrative in a fashion that it is diversifying different areas of international law. Muthukumareswamy, Sonaraja in the area of international investment law. Most importantly, Anthony Angie in the area of public international law, Vasukunesaya in the area of transitional justice, and so on and so forth. We have also Mohsen Al-Attar, and we have James Gatty that Babatunde mentioned in the area of international economic law at large, and then also most importantly Makau Mutua in the area to focus on international human rights law. I think these different areas need more diversification, and they are benefiting from the plurality of the law that TWAIL is able to offer, shed light on, and build the bridge back. So it's about resistance and really multiplying the law. But finally, and to echo what Babatunde there said, I mean, for a long time, TWAIL, that we as TWAIL scholars, I mean, we don't consider ourselves as scholarship. We're a movement, and I think that is what Babatunde beautifully put there. We are not like a monolithic block. It is, you know, the diverse natures who we are, and the interdisciplinary natures that we are. And we have for a long time resisted to be involved with the United Nations for many reasons. But at the same time, we have seen United Nations special rapporteurs who have taken important roles within the United Nations now. So for example, Tendai Achumi, who is now United Nations Special Rapporteur on Racism and Xenophobia. Balakrishna Rajagopal, who wrote the magnificent piece, International Law from the Below, who is now United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to housing. Obi Okafor, who is independent expert on international solidarity. And then finally, and most importantly, also Michael Fakhri, who is United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to food. So what I want to say is it's, just underscore and reinforce what Babatunde said, it's about creating this interdisciplinary, plural approach to the law and create that resistance that will eventually diversify the law.
Thank you so much to both of you. And I just wanted to remind the attendees that if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A tab as we go along, and then we'll come to them at the end. There's no need to wait until the end to write your questions in. But it's great to get that background on what TWAIL is, what the movement is, how it hopes to proceed, where it originated, what the future of it might be. So thank you both for that. I suppose coming back to the article, and I know you mentioned this briefly, but Babatunde, would you like to explore in any more depth what this critical integrated approach is, and how it might benefit those interested in decolonizing the curriculum? And if you feel you've already covered that, there's no need to go over it again. But if there's anything else you wanted to add or that Thamil wanted to add, we'd love to hear more about that.
Thanks, Donna. We want to kind of always expand on it. So because I like the question you've asked, because this article, I've also, I mean, it was written in 2018, 2019. And since then I've written other articles, right? Which articles that are built on what I had suggested. So for example, the context of multi-inter-transdisciplinary perspective is one that I've also further explored in many other writings. So the question is, and one of the things I'm very, very interested in, and I'm doing quite a number of research around, is also that extratextual, extratextual angle to decolonizing the curriculum. So when I say extratextual, I mean things that are not typically expected in the law curriculum. Law is a very conservative discipline. International law is conservative as well. And the Eurocentric approach to law and the international law in particular is one that considers, law as in isolation. Saying law is a political, we just have to engage in abstract concepts, legal positivism, things that are not, things that are, tangential to legal discipline should not really be considered. So even issues of things like novels, for example, why how dare you consider literary works in the syllabus, music, for example, which I've been working on quite a lot lately, music, musical influences in terms of even from a TWAILian perspective. Why bring music? Why engage in things that are, things that are just there for entertainment and bring them into this, discipline of ours. So, those extratextual materials, for example, and even artifacts, for example, and I'm talking of artifacts both in the narrow and the wider sense, so cultural products like, sculpted materials, your bronzes and all of those things, and how those things actually influence the teaching of international law. They can influence the critical approaches to international law. So, for example, in the context of music, one would look at how socially conscious music, for example, are very interesting gateway materials to also, popularizing TWAILian objectives and perspectives, and also making it easier because, let's face it, both mainstream international law and TWAILian perspective to international law can also be written in very esoteric languages, languages that are not easy to grasp. So we could always use extratextual materials to kind of decode these languages, to even say, look, these are some of the things we're talking about. The songs of Fela Kuti, the songs of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Miriam Makeba, and many other musicians, even rappers, and all of those things, to kind of, to tell stories about international law, to also delve into, Thamil spoke about the famous international law from below. That's what exactly we're talking about, the subaltern voices, and how they shape international. So extratextual materials, plays, paintings, and all of those things are very, very, very important elements. We are not saying that they should displace textual materials or treaties, but we're saying they could also come into the picture to kind of, engage in more, to sharpen the critical perspectives of international law. So these are some of the things that, later, I expanded on after I'd written that article. I can always come back to other things.
Thank you so much. And there's so much to learn in that, not just for TWAIL, but for all other aspects of public international law and even law as we understand it domestically, but we don't have all of the hours that it would require to take to talk about that. But thank you for bringing all of that up. And Thamil, you might want to come in on that.
I mean, to add to what Babatunde said, I mean, Mohsen Alatar wrote a fantastic article titled "Must International Legal Pedagogy Remain Eurocentric?" in the Asian Journal of International Law in 2021. He wrote, and I'm just quickly quoting this, he said, Fanon sought to eradicate colonialism, but also to rehabilitate the colonized man. As TWAIL scholars, we must revolutionize our pedagogy, dispossessing ourselves of epistemological prejudices we maintain through our craft. Critical scholars conceive TWAIL to advance an inclusive and plural international law. Yet when teaching international law, we show a surprising commitment to the enduring one, always disregarding the regime's obvious antipathy toward epistemological plurality. And I think that is a very important way how Mohsen put it. I think we are been taught, and I say this as a person who obviously is brown for many reasons. My parents are from Sri Lanka, a very troubled country in these days. I was born, raised in Germany, educated in the Netherlands and in the Republic, and teaching in the UK, country of the colonizer, if you want to put it that way. And what I've often encountered in Germany, and I see some of my colleagues are there from Germany who have been also educated in Germany, the German education, and this speaks to what Babatunde just said, is very conservative. The law education, in particular international law education in Germany, and I've been taught at Marburg and in Bonn, it's incredibly conservative, very rigid, very static, not dynamic, not including critical race theory or TWAIL. They're not even thinking about it in Germany at all. So it's like far off the curriculum. It doesn't exist. So when I was taught at Germany, I was encountered by professors who sold human rights as a Western brainchild, a gift to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So this is how I was raised and educated, unfortunately, in Germany. And when I did my master's in the Netherlands, I'm not going to use the names of my professors in Germany and the Netherlands right now for GDPR reasons. One of my professors in the Netherlands, who was my international criminal law professor, he dismissed, he went on a field trip to Africa. And he spoke and wrote an article about the Gacaca courts in the aftermath of the Rwanda genocide. And he said, oh, these Gacaca courts are very primitive and they're not up to Western standards. And this is how transitional justice was then portrayed in Europe, how backward we in the global South are. We cannot participate in the international legal development of our societies, apparently, because we have to adjust to how International Legal Academy is portraying how we have to adjust to them. So, I mean, this is now an important point, and I know we are conscious of time. I think Babatunde wrote a fantastic blog article, and I'm encouraging everybody who hasn't read it so far in the TWAIL review. The Third World Approaches to International Law review, titled A Critical Approach to International Legal Education in Africa, Some Pivotal Considerations. And Babatunde writes in its conclusion, there are three ways how we should create a meaningful dialogue between critical stakeholders in moving forward. Number one, dialogue within the International Legal Academy, what we're doing right now. An inter and transdisciplinary dialogue, and a dialogue between teachers and learners. And picking up on that one point now, teaching at Nottingham, I've been involved very heavily in decolonizing the curriculum throughout the university, not only at school level and faculty level, but throughout the university level. And it's also about building in particular, and Babatunde wrote about this, writings, encouraging to read writings of people from the Global South. So I'm actively and even aggressively including writings of Professor Chimney, when he talks how Eurocentric customary international law is. And let me finish with this one thought. Students who have been exposed to the Eurocentric notions of public international law and customary international law as one source of international law are suddenly becoming aware how much colonialism has actually influenced customary international law. And by exposing them and showing them, listen, we as Global Southerners have something to say here. We are included in the conversation. And I think including something in the reading list is an active action to decolonize the curriculum.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I suppose much of that actually covered the other questions that I have, but I'm sure you'll have other thoughts on these. So I suppose I'll put the final two questions that I had together, and maybe whatever you want to make of them, feel free with the time that we have. I was interested in how the analysis in the article and any other analysis you've done in other research would benefit pedagogy in and teaching outcomes in the African context, but also in other parts of the world. So how the ideas in this article, but also TWAIL more generally, might usefully benefit those engaged in teaching public international law in the global north. Yeah, so I mean, and just as a teacher of public international law, I'm particularly interested in. So I know you've touched on it, but if there is anything else within time that you'd like to mention, feel free. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, look, the idea is for us to rethink and to not think that we have gotten to a definitive kind of point, or the terminal point in this. We need to keep refining. Of course, a lot of mistakes will be made, initially, and I think this is what usually happens. If you look at how scholars or teachers have tried to decolonize the curriculum. Initially, they would engage in what Christina Shobo-Patel, your colleague there in the UK, calls the sleeping theory, or what another scholar, I think Zolman, calls conceptual emergency, where you would just slip in ideas, or you add one or two TWAIL scholarship or literature to the syllabus and say, oh yeah, we've decolonized and things like that, right? So you do that, maybe without necessarily getting into the heart of the matter. It's one thing to include articles by, Chimney, Sunday Pahuja, include the articles is one thing to include. It's another thing to use it as a way to critique aspects, to critique ideas and ideations in international law. So that is one way. Another way is how we ask ourselves that. So how exactly, what's the way forward here? Are we creating an entire syllabus that strictly focuses on decolonial scholarship? So you bring in, of course, the works of scholars. And while we're doing that, I always say this, we must always also be very, very, very careful not to, not to reproduce the bad practices or vices of what we are criticizing. So we can't say we are decolonizing the curriculum, for example, and only include male scholars, male TWAILian scholars. There are many women, there are many feminists, writing about feminist approaches to international law or gender, the gender perspectives in terms of international law and things like that. We include all of those things, and that's the ethical consideration of it. And also marginalized groups as well. And even the voices of our students, the voices of actors, social actors, in the field of social justice and all of those things. And of course, as I said earlier, musicians as well, the music and socially conscious music, how you bring all of those into it. And one thing we also need to do is, we have to be very conscious about critiquing what I've referred to in some of my writings as the Euro-America Validation Cathedral. And this is how it works. So the Euro-American Validation Cathedral essentially tells you, this is how you write articles. These are the standards, fundamentals of writing articles. If you go against these fundamentals, then your article will be rejected or your article will not be taken seriously. If you have not spent maybe 15 pages or whatever, writing and going on and on and on about, Eurocentric approaches to international law and, paying homage to those who are regarded as the forefathers of international law, then you have not even started. And of course, that is how you also see how the articles of scholars from Global South, for example, being excluded from the so-called international law journals, big international law journals. I mean, James Gatti wrote an article about how there were very few considerations of issues of racism and racialized international law in the American Journal of International Law, looking at it from when it started in early 1900s until 2020. Another, of course, even in political science, there was a research done at the American Journal of Political Science, where out of 579 articles written from 2010 to 2019, if I'm not mistaken, only 11 focused on Africa. And the 11 that focused on Africa, none was written by African scholars, because when African scholars submit, obviously, they will meet the Euro-America Validation Cathedral that says that they cannot write, and what they're writing does not conform to those styles. Those are the expected styles. And this is where, in decolonizing international law, those voices need to be brought into the picture, so that students are also exposed to a wide range or to wide-ranging voices and ideas and ideations and all of those things. And Mohsen as well, Mohsen Alata has also written about why Global South scholars, they also need to publish in articles in the Global South. You might lose some points on it, but you need to strengthen those journals. So we need to, empower our journals and our publication platforms you know, and to, you know, if we are saying that we are trying to engage in civilizational activities or in terms of international law or creating that basket, then we must also see those platforms as our knowledge generation platforms that needs to be equipped and empowered. So yeah. Thanks.
If I just quickly you know, pick up on Babatunde's last point there, I think it's a brilliant point that Babatunde made. It's a brilliant point that Babatunde there made. I mean, I personally, I've been told by many Western colleagues and colleagues that I really appreciate that I should publish with the European Journal on International Law or with the Human Rights Law Review, etc., etc. And I thought to myself, yeah, okay, I could or should do that also for promotion purposes or for job purposes. But at the end of the day, I think ideology comes first for me and my own commitment. And I have specifically decided that I will perhaps, you know, publish here and there in Western journals, but I've been publishing in Brazilian law journals at the University of Uberlândia. I've been publishing with the Nigerian Yearbook on International Law and the Asian Yearbook on International Law, because it's about strengthening, it's about reinforcing that solidarity and force people to focus and shift the focus towards the global south. Srinivas Buddha is another good colleague of Babatunde and myself, an Indian scholar who's teaching at the South Asian University. He wrote also in the TWAIL review a great article, which is called Teaching Critical International Reflections from the Periphery. And he wrote, or he writes this, these lines here. He says, Anthony Ang suggests that in order to address Eurocentrism, we need to focus on local history and its relationship to international law when teaching in a particular country. This is possible when there is an adequate scholarship, particularly related to international law and produced in different locations. Decentralized knowledge production has the potential to generate knowledge that better exposes the global hierarchy and oppression in their local manifestations. And just to finish with one thought, perhaps here, in order to echo what Babatunde said and also Srinivas wrote here, teaching in Nottingham, for example, I try to confront my students with British colonialism in the Republic of Ireland, a country that I consider my own country now, adding to my Dr. Jekyll and Hyde personality issues, being Sri Lankan, being Thamil, being German. It comes also with the Irish identity. But teaching, for example, in the UK and teaching them about colonialism that was stipulated upon the Irish people, I remember that I was teaching European Convention on Human Rights and tried to deconstruct and decolonize the curriculum in that regard by talking about the hooded men case. And believe it or not, those who are not familiar with the hooded men case, please do and Google after that. Students who looked at me and said after the end of the lecture, we didn't know that Britain colonized Ireland. And that was for me an active wake-up call to really confront also history. And that is what Babatunde said at the very beginning. It's about an interdisciplinary approach as well that we need to do in order to decolonize the curriculum. It's not only the legal fashion, it's also about looking about the history and contextualize law in the history in order to confront it and then make it an effort to make international truly international.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's such a fascinating discussion. There are some questions and we might just take a couple at a time and then feel free to answer as you wish, no pressure whatsoever. But maybe just beginning with Enshin Karate, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you for your question. Two questions to Professor Thamil, so you're on the spot there. The first, can pre-colonial Sri Lanka, the relationship between the different Sri Lankan kingdoms, serve as a basis for an inclusive, diverse, and possibly federal constitution or system for a post-Rajapaksa, Sri Lanka? And the second, what is TWAIL's approach to the right to self-determination would it emphasize a stronger right to internal self-determination rather than a right to external self-determination? For example, in the form of a right to remedial secession. Perhaps that's enough for now. Should I take a few more? What do you think?
What I've learned organizing conferences myself is just go through all the questions and throw our thoughts in.
Yeah,
so we'll just make notes and
yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Because there probably will be a lot here. Okay. From the second questionnaire, thanks, Professor Babatunde. How would you propose for more scholars from Africa to get their work published in public international law in a world where the bulk of publishers are based in Europe and North America? And that's from Tani Kirabira. Thank you. From Monica G, a question for both speakers. First of all, thank you both and the organizers for an insightful discussion. My research area concerns the increasing externalization of migration policies and international refugee protection, largely by the countries of the developed north to the south. From the north to the south. I'm wondering how you think TWAIL fits into those policies. Thanks, Monica. And from Ramad Metya, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. My question is, how do we persuade scholars, students, legal practitioners, politicians, and civil society to join the movement and see the imperatives of the movement? Because while we are academics and we continue to share ideas on papers, the movement must grow beyond the borders of academia. As an advocate that may later go into practice to deal with an international law case, would it be interesting to incorporate and refer to the works and ideas of the movement in litigation? And then the final question, Colin Rafter. Hi, Colin, lovely to see you there. Many thanks to Donna and the panelists. Great to see Thamil back in an Irish context. Could a non-lawyer ask a question? Yes, absolutely. Could the panelists summarize why the average Irish law student should take decolonization project seriously when it might not be obvious how it might benefit them professionally? Great questions. Thank you, everybody. So answer as you see fit.
There was another question, but we take it later.
Was there?
Yeah,
I apologize.
It just came in when you were reading Colin's. Hi, Colin.
Oh, I see that. Sorry. Yeah, perfect. Okay.
Just came in.
Sorry. Yes. From Bantu how do TWAIL approaches inform content of specific norms, for example, on the right to development? Great question. Thank you.
So I will just quickly start, Babatunde, okay? Because this is more, not more, it is about you. So I will just quickly address the Sri Lankan part, and then you continue with the rest, and then I jump in whenever. So regarding Sri Lanka, yes, obviously, you know, the Sri Lanka is going through a massive turmoil, and I don't have to elaborate what the situation is right now. Would go beyond the scope here. Sri Lanka had rather harmonious society between the kingdoms, and interestingly enough, the different kingdoms married into each other. The one Thamil kingdom and the two singular kingdoms married into each other for political purposes. And even the early colonial and post-colonial leaders of the country were advocating for a federal constitution and equal rights of languages and cultural rights, etc., etc. So Sri Lanka had actually, you know, because of its own history, but also because of its early signs of cohesion, the possibility of a federal constitution. I'm afraid, also considering the current developments in the country, that, and this is my next book project, by the way, I'm afraid that a federal constitution, at least for the short term, won't be on the table, simply because Sri Lanka is emblematic for a third world country that is state captured by the third world elite that has corrupted international law. That is how I see it. And this is my next project. We have seen that many countries like Peru, like Nicaragua, like South Africa, or the Philippines, India, Pakistan, and in Sri Lanka have captured the state. and they are using international law in constant interaction with international institutions to enrich themselves and impoverish the public. So I don't see a federal constitution coming anytime soon. I would hope so, but the early signs were there when we look at it. Just quickly at number 2, TWAIL's approach to right to self-determination. I've written on this. I don't want to, my shameless self-promotion. I've written on this issue of right to self-determination and remedial secession regarding the Tamils in Sri Lanka. If you're interested, I can send it on to you, or you can even Google it. I think the third world approach is international law, and if you are going back to the origins of the Bandung Conference, have emphasized the right to self-determination as one of the most important plans, the launchpad of international human rights law in order to fight for liberation. And I think right to self-determination came in different fashions and forms, not only internal, but also external in that very regard. And if we are looking at internal colonialism that is happening in many parts of the third world, external self-determination is certainly an issue that TWAIL would also emphasize and look at in favor of liberating people, because that is what we want to do. Counter or juxtapose a counter hegemony. Sorry, Babatunde, now I talked for too long now. Sorry.
I was hoping you would answer the last one on the right to development. Okay, I'll pass. Okay, yeah, I'll pass that one to you. So I think that some very critical questions here. The first is about how do you get published? How do you get published as an African scholar and all of those things? And look, in the past few years, there's been an increase in even in terms of publication platforms for African scholars. And I think I've written about that as well in the article TWAIL Review or Opinion Juris, one of the two, about how you're beginning to see open access publication, for example. So we can talk of the Pretoria University Law Press, PULP, published by the Center for Human Rights. Most of their publications are open access, including the books, including the journal, the African Human Rights Law Journal. Think of what Afronomics Law Blog is doing in terms of, blog creating a platform for everyone to write about issues dealing with international law, international economic law, and even political economy, and how they've also created an open access journal called the African Journal of International Economic Law. So there are many platforms like that on the continent. And there are several other journals on the continent. I mean, I edit one of those journals. So the Southern African Public Law Journal, based at the University of South Africa. There are many platforms. And of course, there are ways in which, again, maybe I'm also directing this at myself as an editor and as someone who writes on international law, to also engage in activities where younger scholars are mentored, and to see how the articles are published. And the very one other thing that has to be said before I move to the next question is also how, look, we deal with citational politics, right? How do you get cited and all of those things, and how even TWAIL scholars are doing an incredible job in terms of even citing journals beyond your typical European Journal of International, American Journal, and all of those things, citing articles from those platforms that I've mentioned, right? And bringing all of those into scholarship. James Gatti did an extensive bibliographic essay of citing and kind of listing global South scholars that are writing on issues of TWAIL and general public international law. And I think we need more of that to kind of popularize the work and to open the platform. Of course, you can, there are also articles on SSRN, there are articles on ResearchGate. These are open access platforms, academia.edu, and things like that, where you can publish. The second question was on how, and I think that's a very important one, how do we get practitioners involved in our activities, because it seems like when we talk about TWAIL, decolonization, it seems we're only talking about the academics, right? But there are also practitioners who are interested in this. And I think it's very, very important that that synergy also occurs, because it's one thing to engage in, the theoretical, conceptual basis of this. The next question is, how do we now use this? The functionality or the utilitarian perspective of decolonization. So how do we use this in the larger world, right? Beyond the academia, beyond the ivory tower. And this is where there has to be a lot of communications, and there has to be a lot of engagements between scholars in practice and also practitioners and scholars in the ivory tower. And of course, it goes both ways. We also encourage practitioners to read more about the things we do in the academia, and all of those things. They read more about what we do. They get more ideas about it. It informs their scholarship, also their practice, and things like that. So I think it's very, very important that we engage in that synergy. And I know Afronomics has been engaged in activities like that, in terms of talking to practitioners, and even bringing practitioners on board to speak on issues, or to even write on Afronomics Law Blog. There are practitioners who write on their experience in practice and how it thing. But we can always I can put more of those some of those links there in the chat box for those interested.
That would be wonderful. Or if you would like to send them on to me, feel free, and I can circulate them to those who
okay.
responded. Yeah,
circulate them. Okay.
Whatever.
Okay. Good.
There is.
Then I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, let me pass the ad question now to Thamil on the right to development and TWAIL.
Oh yeah. We almost forgot.
He was waiting for the moment to pass on the difficult questions to me. So I think what Bantayehu asked there is a fascinating question. Obviously, right to development. How does it really inform the content of this particular emerging norm, or is it a norm as such? Is TWAIL really focusing on developing, or is it perhaps even only focusing on reconstructing our own identity? So that's I think a more important question, and I think TWAIL approach to the right to development perhaps is more informed through economic and social rights. And as I mentioned earlier, perhaps, and Babatunde might jump in and correct me, TWAIL is very much focusing, and for every reason, focusing on socioeconomic rights. If we are looking at the United Nations Special Rapporteurs, and I think that is really framing and building that fuel for a discussion on development for the global South. We are focusing on the right to food. We are focusing on the right to housing. These issues are informing development. They're informing how we can rectify the ills caused by colonialism, right? So I think socioeconomic rights, and like Makau Mutua would put it, or Ratna Kapur would put it, are important for that very aspect, in order to reclaim our role as equals in world politics and international relations. And that, if I may, Donna, if I just quickly address the the other questions that are further below, Damilola asks, how can we make any influence on international lawmaking? We're talking about all these great ideas, and yes, I mean, I've been confronted at numerous conferences. Listen, you're throwing stones at the palaces. How are you going to change anything? That's what I've been told once. I've been even said that we TWAILers are thugs, the thugs of international law. Well, I take that, okay? Even the word thug is actually a North Indian expression that was actually stolen by the British colonizers and used in the English language. So I'm happy to be called a thug, and I'm happy to throw the stones. But how do we actually make the practical influence. Yes. As I mentioned earlier, I think Michael Fakiri's work, Tendai Achumi's work is highly influential in how we are regarding right to food, how we are regarding issues of racism in the time of COVID-19. Michael has only today tweeted something very important about the issue of debt justice and sovereign debt. He tweeted it only today in face of the food crisis in Sri Lanka. I think they are dominating through their roles as TWAIL academics within the international sphere, how international human rights is now influenced by TWAIL. And their annual reports and their country reports have massive influence to this very end. And if I may add to Damilola's question there, only 2 weeks ago, I've been at a conversation. I had a little tete-a-tete, if you want, virtually with the US State Department on the current affairs in Sri Lanka. And we talked about TWAIL. I realized that the US State Department, and again, I would like to stress, this is the US State Department, was aware of the TWAIL movement, and they were really receptive of what is happening there in terms of scholarship and how it is translating. So it is quite interesting how we are now formulating and also slowly dominating the debate in terms of how law is translated in sensibilities such as negotiations, trade negotiations, and human rights development. So I think there is impact that we see at the United Nations level, but also at the interstate level. And finally, I know that we are running out of time. I addressed Bante Yehu, I addressed Damilola. Vohaneni, did you address it, Babatunde? Did I?
We didn't get a chance to
no, we didn't.
Do you want to perhaps address it?
Yeah, I can, because there are two questions. There's another question on migration, right, that we skipped, and this on statelessness. And I think it's very important. I mean, so how do we bring TWAIL perspectives to this? We think of the work of, you mentioned Vera Kafo, the independent expert on international solidarity, and these are some of the issues that have been raised by critical scholars like Vera Kafo, even both as an academic and as a UN expert on international solidarity, on how we need to start rethinking this whole idea of migration and how we even conceptualize the whole idea of statelessness. So it's two ways. So we look at it, in a way in which we address the international community and global north, for example, because global north is becoming very, and we're beginning to see it, becoming very anti-migration, and of course the languages. You think of how Ukraine, for example, exposed many of those things, where certain refugees were, the blue-eyed refugees are better, they come from better civilization, but the brown refugees are problematic and all of those things. And the EU, it's one of the core points in EU relations, issues of migration as well, where the EU, for example, sees this from the lens of security problems. The more people you are from Africa, the more people you are from Asia, you're going to destabilize Europe. And where Africa sees it as a concept, from a developmental kind of perspective, kind of look at the neo-colonial underpinnings of this, the reason why people are moving and things like that. So we look at it from that perspective. We also look at it from even the perspective of the global South, because even issues of xenophobia, Afrophobia, and all of those things, we also have elements of that in the global South. So what exactly are member states, or governments doing in terms of addressing this perspective? So when we are adopting TWAILian perspective, and to address Bonani's question, when we're adopting TWAILian perspective to critique this, we must look at it from both perspectives, right? So saying, yes, it is enough to criticize the international community and the global north, but again, let us also, bring the beam, the searchlight in the introspective years to our national government and how politicians see this as a tool, a quick fix tool, by reinforcing xenophobic elements and all of those things, within the context of the global South. So our last point is that the African Union, for example, had adopted 2 protocols on the same day. So 2 agreements the same day in Kigali in 2018, Continental African and Continental Free Trade Area, and the protocol on free movement across African continent. Member states rushed to adopt the free trade protocol. They were very happy about it. It was, something they really wanted, free trade, and they all ignored the free movement protocol. Many of them had said, no, we can't, we also have to understand this from a security perspective. We can't just open our borders and all of those things. So you engage in this dichotomized kind of view saying trade is good, but if we open our borders, and I'm talking of that within the context of Africa. So we need to address that even here before we start critiquing the international community in terms of how it views some of this. I'm not sure whether I've answered that.
Donna, if I may just quickly,
of course.
1 or 2 minutes, just answer to Colin. I think we just to say what Colin there asked for, how can Irish law students be convinced to take the decolonization project seriously? As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think Ireland is a country that has suffered from 800 years of colonialism, and it is a country that at the international stage is in particular well regarded, and Colin being who Colin is, Ireland is well regarded if it comes to issues of weapons control, if it comes to a range of other issues like landmines, etc., etc. So Ireland has played a massive role in the formulation of international policies, in negotiating at the United Nations level, but also at the regional level, based on its really particular colonial past. And global South countries are looking up to Ireland as a country that has this one particular history in the global North, and is trusting Ireland in this very regard. And if you're looking at Irish policies and the involvement of Ireland in terms of Palestine, it becomes even more important to understand how important it is to teach the average Irish law student why the decolonization project is also important for their own legal education in the Republic, because our own history teaches us that we need to confront hegemony in order to make the law accessible for everybody. And only when the law is accessible to everybody, we can achieve global justice. And I think the Irish example is one that is so important out of its own history. Coming back to what Babatunde said, this interdisciplinary approach is crucial to this very end. And that is why Irish law students should take it serious.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much to both of you. And Monica just says that you have answered her question, and thank you for that. We're a little bit over time, so apologies to both of you and all the attendees for keeping you over, but I think it was worth it, a fascinating discussion, and I would really like to come back to this if we can in the future. But for now, thanks immensely to Professor Babatunde Fagbayibo for sharing your precious time and your crucial research, and to Professor Thamil, Venthan, Ananthavinayagan for your insightful contributions to this very important debate. And many thanks to all of the attendees for being here and for great questions during the Q&A. So you're both very influential thinkers and prolific scholars, and we look forward to following your work in the future. It's been a great privilege to have the opportunity to speak with you about this incredible scholarship. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
That I completely disagree with you, that I'm an influential thinker. I rather think Babatunde and you are, but I'm not. I'm just a preacher in the desert.
We'll all agree to disagree.
Thank you. Just to say a big thank you to you for the invitation, and to Thamil for being a good sport, and also to the attendees who have actually come and to listen and to ask us very critical questions. Thank you very much for that. Yes. Yeah. And I will email you some of those things so that you can share with the with the attendees. Yeah, thank you.
That would be wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
And we have received several thank yous from Colin, from Monica, from Bantayihu, Natando, Nikiko. Everyone's very, very grateful for your time. So Thanks again. And with that,
Thank you.
I will close the session.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.